we've been talking a lot this week about all the different stages and the different areas that we have impact, the different areas we need to focus on as we're stepping into doing this change work in a whole variety of different contexts. So some of them are small-scale things, some of them are big, long-scale, complex things. Some of us are working in corporate environments, some of us are working in the community, some of us are applying this work not only in our workplace, but in our families and our lives. And one of the threads that comes through that space is the importance of some personal practice, some attention at the level of what's going on in the person. So this is a living system, it's like Chris was talking about earlier. We're not machines. We don't function like machines, and the people we work with don't function like machines. And so when we're working in that space of complexity, in that space of human systems, we need to be able to work with ourselves as humans, and we need to be able to work in the space of complexity of working with other humans. One of the things that's also come up that we've noticed is as we step into a lot of this work, particularly when we're working with change and we're in areas of complexity, there's just a high level of uncertainty as we step into stuff. We don't always know exactly where we're going, and we actually need to be in a space where we don't know exactly where we're going. We're not attaching to exactly what the outcome's going to be. If we're going to work with emergence, we need to expand our capacity as leaders and facilitators to stay in that space, and not to just stay in it, with our pillow over our head and our fingers in our ears waiting for it to pass, but to actually stay in it as open as we can. And so that requires some practice. One of the reasons that we stay with the way things are is because we're avoiding discomfort and uncertainty, and because we don't like being afraid. And when we get afraid, we tend to shut down. And so then we shut down and we do the same things that we've always done. And so one of the areas that we can work with that in is in our personal space. And we use the words like, personal practices and self-hosting, and there's lots of ways of doing that. And it is, I find, really helpful to also have some specific practices that work effectively for what you're trying to do in that space. So as Chris was saying earlier, there are some practices that are really great for grounding and centering, that all of us can find helpful as we walk into a difficult meeting or come up against something that's really challenging. And that's definitely a helpful piece. And one of the things that I found that in addition to that that's been very helpful about this practice that we're going to work with this morning, called The Work, is it actually takes some of the power of some of the other personal practices, like allowing me to calm down, allowing me to relax, allowing me to try to be in a more open space. And it allows me to focus that work on specific areas that I'm stuck. And so for me, what happens with that is it amplifies the amount of learning and shift that can happen in that space. And it's not just about getting myself calm enough to get through something, but I'm able to actually start working with the patterns of what shuts me down, what makes me react, what's holding me in a limited space, what's making me unable to see things. I can use the personal practice as I'm working with myself as a longer piece of my own learning and transformation, and as a way to start to shift some of my deeper patterns. And often, as I'm working in a system, I'm not the only person carrying those same fears. I mean, how many of you go ahead of fear as you're working on something and there's other people on your team or other people in the organization that share your fear?
Your fear exercises roll down behind you, and you said that.
How did you do that?
It'll never be that good.
So this is basic, it's crucial work. And sometimes people think it's like soft work, or it's kind of like just for the people that are doing, like the kind of soft work with sparkly things. And I mean, I love sparkly things. But it's actually crucial work wherever you're doing it. And so I think one of our jobs as hosts and facilitators is to find these practices that work well, use them ourselves. For me, use it myself in a way that allows me to show up as a strange attractor that's actually attracting in an opening direction instead of a closing one. And I can use that as radically as I want as my own practitioner. And then also to find ways that once I really understand how that practice works, how can I translate it into whatever context I'm in? This particular practice we're going to work with today, I teach it at meditation centers and yoga centers, and I also teach it at a bank. I teach it with a team of IT people. I teach it with the leaders at the bank. I have a block of clients now from a construction company where
I work with the president of the construction company who's never talked about his feelings anywhere in any of these contexts. And, he's using this practice. And so I put my mind to how is it that I can translate it so that we can do that. And I think the ground of that comes from my own practice. I think it's like that with any of these things. We can jump to how am I gonna give it to them. And it is a helpful thing to be able to offer and share it. But I think our capacity to be able to share any of these things with other people can come out of our curiosity about that grounded in our own practice. And so what I'm going to invite you to today is to be able to have a chance to work with this tool yourself in your own practice. And then we can have some conversations later about how do you teach this, how do you offer it to other people. My experience is that both is highly possible. So the work, the name of this practice is called The Work, the work of Byron Katie. It was founded by a woman in California. And she does, it's applied now, it's kind of a simple practice that can be applied in lots of different places. And the foundational piece of it is that it's a self-inquiry process. So it uses curiosity about your own thinking. You're inquiring for yourself. And so it gives a way to open things up using contemplation or reflection and curiosity. And you're working with your own mind and you're finding your own answers. So this is really based on some of the principles that were spoken the other night from a few people in the cafe. It's like if we have some underlying trust that people actually have a capacity to find their own wisdom about things, this gives them a way to do it. People have capacity for all kinds of stuff, and if you don't create the conditions for it, it doesn't happen. So this is a way to create the conditions for that for yourself and to help other people do that. The work gives us a way to work with any of those areas in our thinking where we find ourselves getting stuck or shut down. So it works with that whole area of mind that we tend to steer away from in the positive, when we're thinking about being positive about things. That's great. There's lots of appreciative inquiry and different ways of following the positive thread of things that's super helpful. And there tends to be this side of our mind that gets triggered that goes into areas like fear and judgment and prejudice, and we carry around assumptions about things, or we get really attached to particular outcomes, or as Tim was saying the other day, we get into we have our ideas of what's right and what's wrong, and we get overly attached to those things, and then it really limits how we can think about them, how we can show up, who we can work with, what we're actually able to open to. And so what the work does is give us a way to use those points of our own stuck places as an entry point into shifting and exploring our own patterns and being in some of our own learning about that. Often I think we have principles about being present and deep listening and being inclusive, and then we're not doing it. And so when we think about, well, why am I not doing that? What's holding me back from doing that? Or have massive blind spots that we're not doing it. We think we're being totally inclusive, and we can't even see who we're not inviting, or how when we invite them, we're not inviting them in an inclusive way, or how we think we've let go of outcome, and really we're operating as if we're totally attached to knowing what's right to come out in the end. So this is an ongoing practice. It's not something that you do once, and then you're like, you got it, I got it, I'm clear. One of the things I've noticed in longer time change projects that I've been involved in and I've witnessed with other people is sometimes we get ourselves, clear enough to launch something, and then we're with a team of people, we're launching it, and then it gets kind of a life of its own. People start joining, and the change starts to happen collectively from everybody, but we can't keep up with it. We start hitting our own walls and our own fears, and then we can drag things down. And a lot of times a change initiative get to a certain point, and then it dies, or 3 years later people say, this is like exactly where we were 3 years ago. And at some point we were totally excited and we thought we were doing something different, and now we've landed in the same spot again. And that's because it's being created out of the thinking of the people that are doing it. And so if we don't have a way to actually work with our thinking about it, we're going to do that. We're going to build our fears in, we're going to build our assumptions in, and again, we won't even know we're doing it. So I'm going to give you a little run through how this practice works, and then we're going to run through it. We're going to run through a little exercise here together so we have a chance to play with it. And I'm going to do a little facilitation here so that we can all be part of one together. And then you're going to have a chance to go off and partner and work with somebody on one of the areas that you're stuck using the questions. We have a number of folks in the room who are either been doing some work with me around it in other contexts, or have been using this in the art of hosting. If they've been to some other art of hostings, I often teach this practice. as the self-hosting piece where I'm part of an art hosting team. How many people have worked with the work at some point? Okay, great. Yeah, so we have a nice mix in the room. So when we go off to partner, you'll be able to mix yourself up a little bit and have a little bit of support around that. Okay. So the practice of the work has a structure to it. And one of the things I find that's helpful when we're offering methodologies or tools is that if we have a simple, wise structure, it can help us get out of our habitual patterns about things. The way that we think about things is created by our own mind. That's how it works. So if we're just trying to think our way out of something that we thought our way into, we're very limited in perspective because we're asking the system that created it in the first place. And if it created it out of what it learned and what it fears, it's going to do that same thing. It's not going to get us much further than we were if we just try to problem solve it or think about it. So the structure of the work has this quite, still surprisingly to me, amazing way of stretching our mind in a number of different directions. Again, thinking of our mind as a complex system, just each of the steps of it seems to stretch it in a different way, and then some insight or some perspective or some view on it can emerge that we couldn't have got to if we were problem solving it. So the work has two parts. The first part of the work is to identify what it is that you're believing in a specific situation in a place that you're stuck. So if you're working on a particular project, or you're in a particular interpersonal dynamic with somebody, or you're wanting to step into something, the place that we apply the work is where it's gotten sticky for you. So noticing where you're thinking you should be doing something and you're not doing it, or you notice you want to do it but you're afraid to do it, or you're doing it but you're suffering a lot while you're doing it, like you're really having to force yourself to do it because you're feeling stuck. Or it could be somewhere where you notice that you have a lot of judgment about a situation. We're working all in that kind of area of mind that we're often trained to try not to have. And so far I haven't found anybody whose mind doesn't do that. You know, I've a client who's been a meditation teacher for like 40 years, and you should see the lists we generate. You know, it's great to be able to work with that part of our mind. So the first part is to identify the thoughts that you're believing, and then the second part of the work is we take one of those thoughts and we use a little series of questions that take us through the thought and help our mind to open and stretch about it in different ways. And it works at a level, I find that it's helpful at a level of helping me resolve specific situations, but it's also helpful at a level of starting to switch my state of mind about similar kinds of situations, and helps me also understand and start to shift some of the bigger patterns that can contribute to that, if I do it as a practice over a period of time. So we're going to do a little piece with the first part of the work before we move along. And some of you have a handout and some of you don't. That has this is the one, it's got on the top of it, it says getting unstuck and working with fear. If anybody needs one and doesn't have one, we've got some. There's 3. So if you just want to put that hold it aside just for a moment. And we're going to use it for writing in a second. So for the first piece of the work, identifying the thoughts and beliefs that we're having, it's from this category of mind that often gets called negative. I've come to see it more as just watching for where I'm contracting. It's like, where am I not open? Where do I feel like I'm starting to shut down or be triggered? I find there's so much rich, helpful stuff in there now, I'm kind of off the positive, negative thing. But it generally is categorized as negative, and generally we don't like the feeling of it. It's from that area of mind. And then what we do is look at a specific situation where it's happening. You often don't have to go looking far for one, or it'll find you. And then you make a list of all the stressful thoughts and beliefs that you have about that situation in short, simple sentences without censoring. So this is a place where we want to work with that part of our mind that's getting really stuck about it. So we don't want to be reframing it. We don't want to be looking at it in a positive way. We want to actually work with that piece. You may not believe these things all the time. A lot of time we can be in a positive mode about it, or we can work with that. But once things get stressful or pressured, that'll come to the surface and often ends up running the show. So we're taking an opportunity to kind of shift our focus over, not be judgmental about it, and have some conversation with that piece of our mind where that's happening. So specific situation, short, simple sentences, and really encourage not to censor yourself. And we just make a list of them. Like, let's check it out. What's going on in there in that particular area? So what we're going to do now is work on a little bit of that before we move along. And I'm going to invite you. There's 2 steps on the sheet. Yes.
So first one, I want to.
So don't do that yet.
My question is that need to be a behavior? It's not like I want to feel something or I want something. It's when I want to do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to do something. So you're going to think of a situation. There's 2 steps on the sheet, and we just want to do the first one. Thinking of a situation in your work or professional life, and you can do it for your personal life if you want to, where you are really wanting to step into something or do something. You could do this for a range of things, but we're looking at our work here and our leadership here, somewhere where you're feeling like you're wanting to step into it, or it could be step out of it. It could be a challenging conversation that you feel is really important to have and you're having a hard time doing it. It could be something that you want to create. But just think of that situation. It's going to be something you're going to work with. And you feel stuck about it. You want to do it, or it feels important for you to do it, and you're either afraid or you're feeling stuck. And just think of that situation. Don't make the list yet. And write it down in one sentence. So either I want to do this, or it feels important to me to do it. Mine that I'm working with is, it feels important to me to give honest feedback to a particular client. And it's like, I know that feels important to me, and I'm feeling like, about doing it. That's all we want right now is the situation. Please don't make the list yet, even though it's there on the sheet. Yes?
Does this work with something that I'm having trouble doing, but I don't feel scared about?
Yes, because sometimes we're aware that we're scared of it, and other times there's stuff blocking it, and we don't really know why. You know that thing that's on your to-do list for like 10 years? That one time. I don't know why, I never seem to get to it. I'm so busy. Yeah. Yeah. It's like I want to, it feels important. It's important to me too. And just write your situation and then just sit and think about it until everybody's done. You can picture it in your mind, bring it up a little bit, because we're going to work with it. So we've just Google searched it and we're like bringing it up into our attention. It's like, oh, that conversation I want to have with that client. It's like, one of the things about this practice is that we're working with reality. We're working with specific stuff from your own work or life. We don't work at kind of a philosophical level of these things. It's like down on the ground with stuff you're actually stuck in.
Okay, I've got a question. It's like there's 2 voices in my head. I'm not sure which one to follow, So it's like, on one way it's like, I want to step out of this piece of work.
Yeah.
On another side, it feels inevitable I'm going to have to do this piece of work. So it's like, it's important to me to find some peace in doing this work. And it's like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you could go with either.
Either one,
Yeah, and often I'll do both. When I'm in this comes up when we use this practice in decision making or discerning. It's like I don't want to stay in it and I'm afraid to step out of it. Or I'm afraid to stay in it and I'm afraid to step out of it. I mean, how often has anybody ever been in that situation? Where it's like both sides is,
Right.
yeah. So, and then you just pick one, and then you do the other one later.
Good.
Yeah, so pick one. Pick staying in or stepping out.
And it can be expansive, it doesn't need to be something. It's not an action, it's not.
What if you want to share with me? Wait.
So could it be more a general way of being? So we were talking earlier about the ontological orientation, so a
Yeah.
different way of showing up. Or,
Right.
I was talking earlier about language, right? So
Right.
shifting language.
Yeah, so it's been important to me to shift my language. But think of a situation where it's alive for you, so that it's not like just a big arching question. You can start with a big arching question and then follow it down to the ground. It's like, where am I experiencing that? And then pick one. It'll work with the whole pattern, but we want to work with the real, something real in your life. Okay. So anybody game to share? Either just the sentence, not the story about it?
Are you going to work with me on it? I thought I was volunteering to get work on it.
Okay. Not at this moment, but you will have a chance to work on it. At the moment, we're just sharing the situation. So all that we're going to do is share them. I'm not going to jump in and...
Okay. Well, now there's very little payoff.
Right. It's coming. Yeah, so just I want to, it's important to me too.
Okay, I stuck my hand up, so I'll say it. I want to be more loving, connected in my daily interactions with my life.
Nice. Yeah,
Anybody else? We're just reading the situation. Paul?
I want to write/blog about the work I consider important.
And you could even get more specific when you go to work with it to think of one piece, like one blog post you're wanting to do and you're like, what is that? So we just follow it down until it feels like it's like you got your feet on your ground. Anybody else? Emily?
I want to have a more equal relationship with someone I work with.
Nice.
I want to talk to the town council about what happened in the meeting.
Anybody else?
I want to cleanly clear up the last of the business around my dad's estate. With my siblings.
Can you see how it made the difference to get like your
Yeah.
feet were not quite on the ground, and then it was
Yeah.
like with my siblings, it's like, oh yeah, this is real for me, and this
Yeah.
is where I'm stuck, and you can
Yeah.
feel it when you land it out of the
Yeah.
sort of thinking it through in the bigger zone. It's like this is where the rubber's hitting the road for you.
Yeah.
That's how you want to make it. Great. Kira?
I wrote, I want to find a way to be honest, and I put and dignified and then scratched it out, so I think there's something there. I want to find a way to be honest about my new reality.
And as you go to land that right down on the ground, think of one place. So it could be, you know, with your team, it could be with a family member, it could be, yeah.
And I got that.
You got that, great. And there's nothing, it's always finding our way to that. So sometimes you'll write it down and it's a little more general, and then it's like, okay, how am I gonna make that more specific? It's just part of finding what you're gonna work on. Yeah. So that's perfect. Anybody else? Good situation. Somewhere you're feeling stuck.
I started broader with it's important to me to let go of the emotions or reactions to a particular individual. I named it for myself. But then when Tim said what he said about the both sides, I want to let go of the relationship with an individual, or I want to change that relationship with an individual. I'm not sure yet, right? So still need to.
Yeah, and it can be both.
Yeah.
Like our mind does not work the way we think it does. It's not a complicated
Yeah.
or simple system. It's a complex system. So it's just like, I want to stay, I want to go.
And it's in the work context, so it's very complex.
Yeah, so it's like when we're probing, that's just two situations.
Yeah.
Right? It's one situation, but you've got two ways that you want to approach it. So I do both in those situations, and for now you're going to pick one. So you can just like even throw a dart at it if they both got some juice in them. Yeah. Yeah. But I think if in the I want to stay, you know, your first line about I want to let go of my reactions to that person, sounds like it's a good.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But I realized though that when Tim said that there are probably other questions that will come out as.
Yeah. Anybody else? What feels important to you to do and you're feeling stuck about it, stressed about it, fearful about it?
I want to represent my company on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I had to get, I'm happy about this conversation because I had to get much more specific about, right, that's where I'm on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Maybe one more? Anybody else?
I want to write a collection of poems and quotes.
Nice. Okay, so has everybody got a situation before we move? Okay, so you've got that in your mind. And now you want to, it's almost like if you were leaning into that situation in your mind, we're just going to download the list of what are you afraid will happen if you do it? What are your stressful thoughts about it? And don't filter. They don't even have to make sense. They certainly don't have to line up and be consistent with each other. But it's just like listening to what your mind has to say about it as you go. So I'll give you a little example, my list. You know, so if I give honest feedback to this client, she will attack me. She will shout at me. She will fire me. She will badmouth me. She will make my job impossible. She will blame me. I will turn out to be totally wrong. It is bad to be critical. I will hurt her. It's not going to help anyway. That's just like, up, 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 up. That's all the stressful stuff that's going through my mind. So I'm just landing it on paper. And you can hear how they're just short, simple. They don't have like long and then, you know, the story version. Just getting used to what are the thoughts and writing them down. So take a moment, think about your situation. Don't overthink it, just anything that comes through your mind that's stressful or fear-based, and make a list. Everybody got at least a few things on their list? Yeah. So anybody game to just share your list? No explanation, we don't need the background, but just, you can either say what the thing is that you want to do in the list, or you can just read the list. I'll read the list.
I can't do it, it won't happen, it's impossible, I will fail, I can't make it, I'm a loser, everyone will see, it won't be that different anyway, I still will fail, I still will be unhappy, I'm doomed, too much fun, not enough time, can't handle the flow of energy, someone will drag me down, someone will shoot me down, I'm not allowed to.
Thank you. Anybody ever had any of those thoughts? Yeah, feel free to borrow from each other's lists.
That's right, I saw her list.
Anybody else? Want to read your list? Your list? Yes.
I will be judged. I won't have enough experience. I won't be ready. I will seem foolish.
Thank you.
I will not be acknowledged. My vulnerability will not be met. It will continue as a right-wrong struggle. It will deepen the distance
wanna just jump in there and do it with all your? Ready now. Why is this not happening? Anybody else? Wanna share your list?
I don't want to share my list, but I just want to say this list makes me want to throw up.
Yeah.
Physically, I'm literally.
Yeah, so it can be pretty startling when we just see what's going on in that space. And I think one piece that is to just bring compassion to ourselves as we're doing this. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about this practice over time is it's helped me to be more compassionate about that side of myself and that side of my mind. And until I could do that, I couldn't work with it. And yet it was still there. And so I found for me, it was one of the underlying things of then just be busy all the time, or just like do this other thing over here, or, you know, take control or give away control. But like all of those things could come from my inability to sit compassionately and curiously with this kind of stuff. And it's, as a practice, it's really helped me with that. I found that I can get a lot of learning from that space now, and I can feel a lot more compassionate about it, and it can be pretty startling.
We were talking yesterday in the open space about this constant urgency that we have in our work, you know, and that leads us to make bad decisions, and it leads us to not work in a collaborative way. And I think it's that, you know, I think you hit it in the nail on the head there. Like, I keep this list in my stomach, and when I took it out of my stomach, I felt a lot better. I felt a lot less stressed. So yeah, I mean,
it can just play into the various patterns. And so if we're just trying to problem solve busyness, you know, we're never going to get under the surface to see these could actually be some of the things. I'm not saying that's the situation for everybody, but these kind of things affect the system. And so this gives us a way to see them and then start to work with them. So maybe just a couple more people reading their lists, and then we'll move along. Tim?
I would just like, I'll read the list, and I've had a direct experience of what you just described, of like actually thinking it was because my life was busy that was the problem, and then like reorganizing my calendar and discovering it was nothing to do with my busy life that was the problem. It was like I was busy to avoid a whole load of stuff, right? And sort of space in my calendar just actually gave me a lot to work on. So mine were, I'll let my buddy down, they'll never invite me again, I'll lose the money, I'll screw it up for everyone, it's too late, people won't like or respect me anymore, and I'm replaceable, brackets, it will go great without me.
Be one more person? Move along.
So I want to find a way to be honest about my new reality in my business. And so the thoughts are, being honest, it will make it so. It is true. I will feel ashamed. It's unprofessional. It isn't true. I will look weak. It will be true. I will let go. I will break down. People will think I'm crazy. I will disrespect him. I want to hurt him. It will make it so.
Thank you. So you can also be, you know, one of the things I find in the compassion space with these lists as well is it gives us a way that's important to you to do that. And this can give you a way to work with the stuff that's in the way to move through it. And I often find it'll actually support me if I do that. Rather than just trying to ram ourselves to do things. You know, it can be very violent when we think, I should just be telling people what's the matter with me, or I should just be nicer, I should get on with publishing this thing, and we kind of push ourselves through it. And partly that can really burn us out, and it's just kind of violent. But it also, we miss a whole ton of learning and information and perspective that could help us do it even better if we were able to engage with those sticky spots.
It's a little bit of a sidetrack, but there's just the reference to the gut piece too. I think about the word that Gabor Maté talks about, where you know, your gut is actually a thinking organ, so you're holding all of these pieces within you, and it creates illness and malady in your life. And I think that's part of that burnout piece as well. But just if you think about how we unpack this, what it feels like, oh, what else am I holding in that space?
Yeah. And then I'm surrounded by humans who are all doing this. I mean, is there anybody here who has no list at all? Who just can't relate to this at all? Yeah. So if you're in a room full of people hosting a meeting, or whether people are in suits in their corporate space, or whether people are, you know, sitting in a circle with candles, or somewhere in between, it's just, I haven't been in a room yet where there was anybody who didn't have a list. A couple times there were people who thought they didn't have a list, and then about 10 minutes in had like a list with 50 things on it. But you know, everywhere we're moving with human beings that are actually struggling with this stuff as well. So if we're going to be an attractor in the system for some compassion for that and space for it, and also to actually be working with some of the shared things, besides just being a happier, healthier human being, it's good work to do, and good work to be able to do in this focused kind of way. So you have your list. Luckily, you don't have to sit down and work on every single thought on this list in order to get some movement. It doesn't work like that, thank goodness. But as we move to the second part of the work, the inquiry piece, we just take one. So you're just going to actually take one of these beliefs off your list, and that's going to be the one you're going to work with. So we're going kind of from the swirling, spinning mind about it to getting still and specific about one piece. So for mine, I'm going to choose, she is going to yell at me. I think I wrote it twice on my list. Obviously up. You can choose anything from your list. You don't have to think which is the main one, the biggest one. You're going to get something out of it if it's on your list. But choose one and circle it so you've got that one to work with. And then we're just going to put it aside for a moment. And I'm just going to run you a little bit through the second part of the work. And you're going to take that piece, one that you've circled, and you're going to do your partner exercise with it. So you don't need to follow with me now as I'm giving you the questions. You're going to have a chance to work with that afterwards with the partner. Okay? So the second piece of the work is the inquiry part. It's like the part where we take that belief and we start to kind of stretch it and question it and look at it from some different perspectives. Depending on where who I'm with and where I'm teaching this, I'll speak about it as a meditation or a reflection. Depending what kind of space you're in, you can think of it different ways. But it really is about getting still with it and having a chance to kind of drop down into it and look at it from some different perspectives, using these questions at the work. I often invite myself at the beginning just to a bit of a mind of invite myself to see something that I haven't seen before. I'm definitely not trying to problem solve it, and I'm definitely not just trying to get to the end to figure out what to do. It's got the pause element to it, however you want to speak to that. So we take the one belief and we run it through these 4 questions and then what are called turnarounds, and that's what's on your card. Okay? So it's really easy to follow. You don't have to think up your own wording for the questions. Please don't. Actually trust the skillfulness and wisdom of these questions as you follow it through, and you'll get some sense of how it works when you've done it as you're following those. And so you take the one belief. So I'm working with, she will shout at me, and I'm going to answer each of these questions. The first 2 questions, the answer is only yes or no. You're not naturally going to land on yes or no. You'll probably naturally land on a lot of busy talk in your mind. But the challenge is to be able to say you're going to commit to either a yes or a no. Don't force yourself to a no if it's not where you're landing. Either answer is fine. All of these answers need to be your own. That's the purpose of it. But do take your time to look for it. So if, the first question is it true? So we're actually pausing, and you might think it seems kind of obvious to ask that question, but actually the more stressed we are, the less likely we are to have spent any time really thinking about whether it's true or not. And so this invites us to actually stop and look at it from that perspective. So she will shout at me, is that true? If I give her this feedback. And I have to really sit with that and look at it from all the perspectives. If I just say yes to the first 2, then I know I'm not checking it out. I'm not going to get any new information. You've probably already tried to just talk yourself out of it, and that hasn't worked. That's why you're actually willing to sit down and do this. So give it a little chance to look at it. So I would say, is it true she's going to shout at me? And I'm going to check out to see whether that's true. Can I absolutely know that it's true, that that's what's going to happen? She's going to shout at me. And I'm going to look at it again. Yes or no is fine. You take some time to look. The third question is, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? So this is a self-reflective piece. And you can use this little series of tiny, sorry people with the eyesight that I now have. Hopefully you brought your glasses, tiny little print. There's a series of little questions there that help you explore that territory. What happens for me when I hold on to this belief that she's going to shout at me if I give the feedback? What does that feel like for me? How do I act? How do I show up with her? How do I treat her? What am I getting out of it? What is it stopping me from doing? And you can take anywhere from 10 minutes up to, I've sat in that for an hour when I've been really trying to find my way through a pattern. looking at all the components of that and just noticing them. It's not about judging them, but the more clearly you can see them, the more your mind can work with them and the more the chance that you're going to see patterns and they can shift. So I might just notice things about, that I avoid the person. I definitely avoid her when I think she's going to shout it, or I avoid her, I don't return her emails. What are some of the things that I do? And you just track through that. And after you've looked at it from some of these perspectives in that question, you go to the fourth question, which is who would you be without that thought? And this is a little bit of a leap of imagination, but try to pull it as close to home as you can. It's not just a light thing. Is to look and see in that same situation with this client that I have that I've noticed shouts at people sometimes, and I'm kind of afraid of on the shouting thing. And I have a job to do to give some feedback in the reality of that, not flying in some other lovely client that I wish that I had that didn't shout at people. Who would I be right in that same situation if I wasn't locked on this fear that she was going to shout at me? Got this feedback to give. And what would that be like for me? And I just try it on. What does it feel like? What would I notice if I wasn't believing that thought? And it just gives my mind and my system a chance to really consider that possibility and sink into it and find whatever's there. Often we can't even have a chance to explore that when we're locked in the other belief because we're shut down. So by the time you get to question 4 and you really sit with that, you've got a chance to find some stuff you might not have seen. And I really encourage people to actually let that be an embodied experience. That's the place that I always start. What would that feel like for me? To be sitting across from her, even when her face is red and her foot's tapping, to just not be going in my mind to that whole thing I just discovered around she's going to shout at me. I just didn't have that in my mind. And I checked that out. After you've sat with that for a little bit, shared with your partner what you found, or you could be doing it in writing if you're doing it as a written exercise, then we flip around to what are called the turnarounds. And the turnarounds, they seem like just a little funny puzzle where you're flipping words around, but it's quite amazing how effective this little turnaround exercise is at stretching your mind and allowing your mind to consider different perspectives right on the ground in that situation. So you can turn it around a number of ways. They're on the card, they're up on the wall. But what it looks like is taking almost the exact wording that you have and flipping it around to say, the first one would be to the opposite. So she's going to shout at me, she's not going to shout at me. I actually don't know, it's the future, but I'm going to spend some time looking at it from that perspective. What are some indicators that I could see that possibly she's not going to shout at me? And I would look around for any that I have there. I'm not trying to, we're not trying to dumb it down or put, sugar coating on it. We're just trying to look at reality through that lens. It's possible. And I'm going to look and see what examples support that. So look at it from that perspective, find any supporting evidence or examples that you can find. I can find in my mind immediately a little space where, I've seen somebody give her feedback and she didn't shout. I've seen people give her feedback and she shouted at them, but I've also seen people give her feedback and she hasn't shouted at them. So it's like, oh yeah, that time that, he talked to her about this, it's like, oh, she didn't shout at him. That would be one example for me. I could be looking into the past for that. It's like, oh, she actually said, I wish people would give me more feedback. At which moment I was like, blah. But and then I could go off into my, I know why people don't. But if I was actually to just take that as an example, this person has told me they want feedback. So that's an indicator that maybe they're open about it. And I would just look, whatever you find is going to be your own, in your own situation. But it's like examples that support that. Another way I can turn that around is called turning it around to the other. It's kind of like if there's me and somebody else in my thought, I just flip their places. So she's going to shout at me, I'm going to shout at her. And I think, okay, I'm looking that a little creatively in my mind. Is there any possibility in this situation where there's some truth from that perspective? Doesn't mean it's the only perspective, but I want to hang out from that perspective a bit and look at it a while from there and find some examples. So I notice I already shouted her in my head. I'm shouting the feedback at her in my head because I'm wanting to be really far from her. The way that I talk to my friend about her is kind of shouty. I don't actually shout, but it's definitely got that quality to it. And so I could just look, where in this situation am I doing the thing to the person? And look at that. Right? Again, we're not deciding who's right or wrong, thank goodness. We're just looking at it from these different perspectives. So I'd find a few examples there. And then another way to turn it around is to turn it around to myself. So I am going to shout at myself and see where in this situation is that dynamic present and showing up. And I'm going to look at it from that perspective. So I'm shouting at myself, don't give her the feedback. Would be one way I'm shouting at myself. I tend to get if somebody gives me, you know, she shouts at me, then, you know, I can see where I could go, you know, all the drive home, I would be getting pretty critical of myself of how I gave the feedback or whatever that was. I would just sit with that and find that. You know, I'm just doing a very quick touch on it to give you an idea. But I'd really sit with that. Where in this situation am I doing that to myself? Good information. When you come to the end, with this one it has 3 turnarounds. With some it might only have 1 or 2. You can play around with it. There isn't a summation now thing that I go and do. It's actually a practice that helps me open my mind, and a combination of insights and ideas of things to do will often come out of that. Sometimes tons of them, sometimes just a few. Sometimes I think, oh, I just feel a little bit more open about it, but the next time I see the person, it's very different. Sometimes it'll make me leap into action on the thing that I wanted to do. Sometimes it allows me to see a totally different option and I don't even do the thing I thought I wanted to do. It's really not, we're not doing this work to make a particular outcome happen. We're doing this work to create a space for what our actual intelligence around it is, to emerge and to help ourselves see other perspectives around it. So it's really not, whatever you wrote I want to, or I think it's important to do, we're not actually trying to get you to do it, we're trying to shift your relationship to it and start to practice stretching your mind in situations like that rather than, you know, clamping down and problem solving or reacting.